Hello, everybody, and thank you for tuning into the Liberty Report. With us today is Daniel McAdams, our co-host. Daniel, good to see you today.
Good morning, Dr. Paul. How are you this morning?
Doing well, thank you.
Good.
All set to go.
Yes.
Got to take care of business here because we have a little meeting coming up this weekend.
Lots to do.
And you're not nervous at all about that because you have to worry about everything. I don't worry about anything.
Well, it's always
And
a
I'm
challenge.
sure you'll have it down pat, and there'll be a lot of people there, and they're going to be very pleased. But before that, we have talked about things that people should be displeased with.
Yeah.
And there was a major finding this past week in a court, which actually it was pretty startling to me. And this had to do with Hillary's lawyer, Michael Sussman, who I think people have written that he actually said he lied. You know, he wasn't really hiding behind it to an FBI agent. And that, of course, is a mixed bag because that system is a mess. But this describes the mess in our judicial system and the CIA and the FBI and the whole works. Because even though it looked like it was going to be cut and dried, you know, nobody voted against him. Everybody just exonerated him and said, I would think that the average person off the street, especially those that have never been involved in politics, just describe what has occurred. They're saying, yes, he lied. That doesn't mean that, you know, I think our system is so neat and clean that if you can prove one lie against somebody they said lied against the FBI, well, I'm worried about how do you stop the FBI from lying? Or the CIA. The CIA's position is, of course we lie. We were taught how to lie and kill and steal, you know, that whole thing. But anyway, the finding came down, and they said that he was totally innocent, and Hillary was delighted, you can imagine. But I wonder when she knew that there would be no conviction. Probably a year ago.
Probably when it happened.
I don't have to worry about this. But our friend Jonathan Turley, you know, was a bit annoyed by this thing too, and he's somebody we really respect on these legal matters. But I want to read a quote that he wrote why he thinks it's really out of control, this whole thing. He says, this is by Turley, I mean, he is facing a jury that has 3 Clinton donors, an AOC donor, and a woman whose daughter is on the same sports team with Sussman's daughter. With the exception of randomly selecting people out of the DNC headquarters, you could not come up with a worse jury. And that, you know, I don't know what the process has to be, but I guess a lot of responsibility, if this came up, if you had a good judge, he would probably have authority to wake up a few people with this. But I don't know what the process is how to stop this. But anyway, it went all the way, and the result is that he's totally innocent. And I think it raises some questions rather than answering all the questions, because right now I don't think there's many people, you know, who are serious are raising the question, I wonder if he really did lie. I wonder if he didn't. He practically admitted he lied. So I don't think that is the issue. The big question they have is why has he been able to do this and get away with it, and what does it really mean? What does it mean in the scheme of things in the judicial system, and what does it mean about elections? And I mean, it goes on and raises this question. I think this was a really, in a scheme of things, not a major issue in the sense that it was major because it was significant and it was an accusation of lying. But when it comes to somebody standing on trial for murder and a few other things, it to me it makes me suspicious. But I was never suspicious before I started working with you. You make me suspicious.
Conspiracy.
But I'm just wondering, you know, because you know, it just looked like, why would anybody push this trial? You know, it almost, and it was such a benefit, you know, to Hillary. And they say, well, that's the Hillary people say, See, that's the way justice works. This is a wonderful victory for the judicial system and for the jury system. But I think, in my mind, I still have lots of questions.
Yeah, it is. And you know, the whole Hillary presidential campaign of 2016 was simple. Trump is Putin. And that's what they were able to get along. And they lied through their teeth about it. The Alpha Bank, all sorts of things, the bugging of the campaign, which Obama was involved in. The whole thing was a lie, but it was a very successful lie. It was a successful, dirty trick. I think it makes Watergate look like something out of the kid's sandbox. But this is what it is. Trump is Putin. So this trial essentially was Hillary versus Putin. It wasn't Sussman versus, the U.S. government. It was Hillary versus Putin in a town that voted 90% in favor of Hillary in 2016, as Turley points out. And at a time where Putin is even more of a Hitler or whatever you want to call him than he was in 2016. So the guy is even lower on the rung. It's Hillary versus him in a town where Hillary is the queen of the Beltway. And Turley himself points out that one of the jurors, they interviewed him afterwards. This is pretty interesting. He said, I don't think it should have been prosecuted. There are bigger things that affect the nation than a possible lie to the FBI. So basically he's saying, hey, whatever, no big deal, he lied. And as you say, it's not as cut and dried about lying to the FBI and getting prosecuted as we'd say, but this sort of idea that this kind of attitude prevails in a town does bring up, and Turley says, not necessarily these people are biased and can't be on a jury, but certainly it raises the question of whether this is a politicized, quote-unquote, justice or an actual justice.
With this amount of information, which is fairly accurate, this result seems to be pretty weird, but it should have destroyed, well, a lot of things should have destroyed Hillary's credibility a long time ago, but this should really totally destroy that. And the DNC, I mean, if people wonder whether there's cheating going on, of course, 99% of the accusations, maybe not quite that much, but the accusations basically by the major media is that Trump did all the bad stuff. He was one. I imagine the majority of American people still think that Trump was in bed with the Russians in this campaign because it was pumped into their brain for so long. Endlessly. And this would have been, a chance to change this. But I wonder about changing the venue, taking that case and getting it out of that area. I wonder if you had a different judge, I wonder if there was some prohibition against it. But most of the time, if you say, I can't get a fair trial here, a decent judge would say, well, that's probably true. So, and then he'd let him go someplace else. But I don't even know if that proposal, I'd like to know if the proposal was ever made, to the judge, to change the venue.
Yeah, it was interesting, and Turley did make some good points comparing this line to the FBI case versus the case against Michael Flynn. And he said the contrast couldn't be greater. It was held in the same federal district court in D.C., but the way the court ruled on evidence on Sussman versus Flynn was diametrically opposed. On Sussman, they absolutely limited to the bare minimum the evidence that could be presented, whereas in the Flynn case, it was no holds bar. Throw in everything, throw in all the mud, and get your conviction. So there is a question about the politicization of this justice here in the D.C. court, and I think it's a larger question that people are asking probably about the country. But it seems very, very evident here that you had a political judge who was out to make a political point.
Right. Do you want to go on to our next little item that we have?
More court stuff. Yeah, more court stuff.
Right. Texas stuff. Texas ruling next week, and they got to stay on a bill dealing with a problem that we've alluded to and admitted we don't have one magic wand to wave and solve the problem, but it's significant, and that has to do with the First Amendment rights dealing with social media. And do they have a right to censor what they produce? And they claim they're producing a private business organization, and therefore they have a right to monitor and make sure there's no hate speech in there, and they're protecting the people. And they make it sound very good And of course, I think if you have any instinct toward libertarianism, you work real hard to protect the right of the First Amendment. And the founders understood very well that it protects you for saying things that are, impolite. But that doesn't give you the permission to libel or slander. And so this has been going on. And I think the other thing that they had to face in this case was the fact that would the rules of newspapers be applied to this that existed before the social media, or is it a different system and there can't be any liabilities? But when these laws were passed recently, these companies they're exempt from some of the liability, and that to me must be a major effort. But I don't think it's going to be sorted out very easily, because I even think this vote, it was 5-4, but some of the people I consider pretty good on there, But this was a stay. This wasn't a final decision on the bill itself, and maybe the confusion and the rulings. And some people said we ought to wait for the lower court ruling to come through. So, but it is bad, because the one thing that bothered me the most was they talked about the law that was passed, that was being challenged, said that they have an ability to challenge people being kicked off for their political views. Now that gets a little bit messy, but they said that if their political views are really, really bad, you can do it. But First Amendment, I don't think that approaches the seriousness of defending the First Amendment.
And the problem we have with this, and we've struggled with this on the show for a long time now, the problem is it's not as simple as conservatives versus liberals and progressives, as the media would like to make it look. It's more complicated. And this is a Texas law that would have allowed Texans to sue companies if they censor an individual based on political viewpoints or geographic location. And so that is a difficult, and as you point out, it's a 5-4 ruling. It's a very close ruling. The dissent was Justices Alito, Thomas, and Gorsuch. But it's not a cut and dried issue at all. And as you say, it's an issue of whether these are publishers or whether they're platforms. Is Twitter a publisher? In which case, obviously, they have the right to edit what they put out. But then if they're publishers, they don't have, as you say, some of the exemptions from prosecution as to what they publish, which they do have. Or are they simply a platform where they say, here it is, and you print what you want? And it's not as simple as it's said. And here, I think Justice Alito captured how difficult it is to grapple with this. He said, "It is not at all obvious how our existing precedents, which predate the age of the internet, should apply to social media companies." And that's a good point.
That's a big challenge that they have. I keep looking for the free market answer to this, and I think, one, they shouldn't have immunity, but nobody should have the right to slander, and there should be recourse. But also, social media is being exposed for what they are, and the more they're exposed, the more unlikable they become. And they are not capitalists. They care a darn about First Amendment rights. That's my opinion.
Yeah.
So, but the other thing that could happen, there will be new platforms, and there are new platforms, and they're trying to invite people into them, and they're promising more flexibility and a better approach to when people get canceled and thrown off for political reasons.
Yeah.
And so I would think as these platforms get more popular and people are always looking, we're always looking, well, how are we going to be out there if they cancel us? I think the contract solves a lot of problems in the free market system. Is and the contract is still respected, but in this case, the contract has been between the politicians and the big companies, because from the very beginning, these social companies got benefit from the government. I think they're part of corporatism. I think they work hand in glove together. I think they get fees. These corporate media companies get fees from the government to help monitor everything that we do. So this is a far cry from laissez-faire capitalism that honor and respect the First Amendment. I think that it would be good if that was the only thing we were dealing with. But this is much more special interest. I think there's a grand collusion between government and social media, which is a challenge to the First Amendment. But I think they have the wording on their side where they say, "Oh, we're a private company."
Yeah.
And so the big, yes, they're a private company, but are you doing the dirty work for the government? Think of all those enforcement rules during COVID. I mean, it was the private companies doing it. And the government say, "Oh, we leave it up to the companies," and then they have all kinds of ways to blackmail companies or local communities to ban these laws handed down. So it's a far cry from understanding exactly how the First Amendment would work in a free society.
I think the smoking gun of this collusion is very, very obvious that these media companies only censor in a way that reinforces government narratives. You don't see them out there saying, "Oh, we're going to censor anyone who says that shots are great," right? It's always what the government wants. They want to say that shots are great, so if you say they're not great, forget it, you're out. If you say, well, maybe Russia has a point going into it, boom, you're gone. So they always censor in a way that the government wants. And you point out that the market is working slowly, not as quickly as some would like, but look at places like Rumble, who are far less censoring of their viewers. And a lot of people that have been banned from YouTube are now on Rumble and are successful on Rumble. And others, Odyssey is there too, and there are a few others. But that's a very, very good thing, I think. But the other thing, and we talked about this a little bit before the show, one other solution might be the issue of contracts, because there is a contract when you sign a terms of service and go on to Twitter or Facebook or what have you. But then when you get banned, like some of us at this table were, not Ron Paul, right? When you get banned and you say, well, how did I violate the term of service? And they said, well, it's this. And you say, well, actually, if you look at what I said, I didn't violate this. It was something other than that. And then you get a robot saying, you're banned, you're banned, you're banned, forever. So maybe, a contract that could be enforced might be one solution out of it.
Right, and you described the conflict, and then they have an immunity. You can't sue them.
Yeah.
So it isn't a very good system at all, and yet it's a very important subject. But I'm a strong believer in the marketplace. What we have to do is always move to the market making more decisions, with the contract, and also pointing out the collusion thing. Whether it's the money collusion or whether it's the revealing of information, to the government that they probably against the federal law for the government even to do it. So what do? They let some company do it, and then there's always a threat of what can they do. The government can both harm and help these companies, and they know it. They know that they might make big bucks for turning over big lists, and it's a big financial thing that goes on. But this hasn't settled it, but it's caused attention to the problem. And I just hope as the time goes on that we get real serious discussions and proposals on how we can make sure that they use the principles of personal liberty and contract and understanding the First Amendment, because that is so necessary. Because if we don't have freedom of expression, it's tough enough already because, the media is totally controlled.
Yeah.
And we can't say, well, they're big, we have to cut them back. Oh, they're political, we have to stop them from saying anything political. That won't be it. But we have to get people to the point where they know exactly what, a free society is like, and why, criticizing people still permitted under the First Amendment. And most of these things can be handled voluntarily and with contracts, but then you have to have a set of rules, and you have to have a Justice Department that might be fair and balanced too. And we just went over a case where the Justice Department isn't always fair and balanced in distributing justice.
Well, on the one hand, we hate the collusion between the government and these companies, and that's absolutely corrupt. And as you point out, it is fascism for sure, because they get the goodies if they go along with what the government says. But we also hate the politicization of this issue, and that's a real problem. And there's another Politico article that's out that quotes a fellow called Adam Candub, who's a former Trump administration official. He supports the Texas law. And here's from the article. He agreed that change is on the way, which is not good. He said, quote, the axiomatic any restriction on business is bad approach of the Federalist Society judges is fading fast in the face of the right's anti-tech animus. Quote, we have a different dynamic working now, he said, noting that the whole conservative movement is facing the same question. So his view, and I think it's an incorrect view, is that this is an anti-conservative animus. They're colluding to block out conservative voices. That is patently untrue. What they do collude with government on is to disappear, to silence voices that are outside the narrative, because we know many honest, decent, progressive-oriented websites, Twitter accounts, etc., that have also been banned for challenging the narrative on a number of issues: the Middle East, the wars, the COVID, look, Mint Press News and Consortium News, two very, in my view, fairly mainstream from the independent side outlets have been canceled by PayPal.
Yeah, and what they're leaning toward and are concerned is that the collusion is the problem. They're not colluding right.
Yeah,
the right way
exactly.
to do it.
That's
you
it.
know, we want to collude too.
Yeah, let us collude.
Oh, that means we need to win more elections. Well, why don't we win more elections for people who defend the First Amendment and understand private property and understands the Constitution? That is it. But no, we need our colluders in there, and we have a few on our side that are pretty good at substituting their collusion with our collusion. People need to understand that people do it. Some of them do it for the benefit of the individual who seems to be suffering. That's why you have a welfare state. You can't allow people to suffer. We have to take care of them, and therefore they have to use force to do it. But then they're making the whole situation worse. So I don't think this problem is going to be solved by more regulations or change in regulation. It's going to be solved by understanding why people should voluntarily get along together and have a system built into the contract who the negotiator and the arbitrator is going to be. And that has already worked in our system, and that needs to be emphasized.
Absolutely. You said it way better than I was trying to say it. But let's move on to the last one, and this is just an interesting story because we've been following the transition or the transformation of views on the U.S. and EU reaction to the Russia-Ukraine situation. And I'm going to ask if we skip those first two clips and just go right to the one with the evil Putin on the cover. There we go. This is from The Guardian. Now, Guardian is a very mainstream, pro-war, progressive, right-wing, however you want to call it, magazine, very establishment newspaper. Larry Elliott has an op-ed saying, Russia is winning the economic war, and Putin is no closer to withdrawing troops. And he points out the perverse effects of sanctions means rising fuel and food costs for the rest of the world, and fears are growing of a humanitarian catastrophe. Sooner or later, a deal must be made. He's recognizing the obvious. And I would say, Dr. Paul, if you were going to put a mole in the U.S. and EU governmental structures who was secretly working for Putin, you could not have done better than what they have achieved now. But I put this quote up in this next quote because this is something that I know you'll want to comment on. This is from the article. Sanctions were imposed on Vladimir Putin not because they were considered the best option, but because they were better than the other two available courses of action, doing nothing or getting involved militarily. And isn't that how exactly the case? Well, we got to do something. Okay, how about sanctions?
Even if it's worse. But the other thing that they never go to the next step. Well, if we do this, what might be the unintended consequence, or maybe the intended consequence for some of them, you know, the chaos that it causes. But all this nonsense of us regulating the markets and the current president, I tend to always want to be careful and say, oh, it's Putin caused all of the inflation. It's not quite that simple, but he's caused a lot of heartburn and a lot of harm. And everything he has added on to the inflationary problem, which is a monetary problem and a Federal Reserve problem, who's paying the bills on it? The Americans are suffering. That's why their gasoline bill is even higher. See, the gasoline bills would be high even without all this nonsense on the stupid regulations. And it would be high because of the debasement of the currency.
Yeah.
But now it's they add this to it, and so in all this activity, the American people are paying for this, and it's making them angry. And unfortunately, what generally happens throughout history is the anger turns into violence, and people don't know how to handle it otherwise, because it's always the same thing over and over again. You know, and always right now it's a blame game. Who are we going to blame for all this? And they're always saying, well, Trump's to blame. He's not even in office, but he's still being blamed for everything. And well, does Hillary get blamed? She's not in office, but her friends are in office.
Yeah.
Do they get blamed? Oh no, they're saintly. You know, they'll take care of us. So it's a real problem. And you know, I think what is interesting is how the Russians have circumvented. They really, people won't believe this, but the Russians and the Chinese are actually using some free trade principles. That when somebody blocks it, you think up something else. If somebody says, you can't come into our country, we won't do it. Well, we'll go around you.
Yeah.
So they use that principle, and they've been able to accomplish a lot of sales. Once again, experience, because everything we do causes prices to go up, and the Russians make more profits because the costs are up. But in the other area, the Russians and the Chinese and the Indians right now are talking more than ever about an alternative to the dollar. Now, that is a big deal. It's not going to be here tomorrow, but we're on a road to that, where the dollar, and we've already seen records amount of goods and services being traded with the use of the dollar, or getting away with using the ruble. Which on a scheme of thing, who would want a ruble? Well, right now there's some people say, well, if that's the only way I can buy oil, that's the way I'm going to do it. That's how we barged in to make the dollar the currency, the world currency. We made a deal with the Saudis. We'll take care of you. We'll give you all your bombs you ever wanted, and you just make sure everybody has to use dollars, and that's being challenged now. Interesting things that happen, but dangerous.
And that's the irony of the whole thing, right? Because we've been speculating, well, is the euro going to rise and challenge the dollar? Is the yuan going to rise and challenge the dollar? Nobody would have guessed that the ruble would be the one to rise and challenge the dollar. And it's all our own doing, the EU and the US is doing.
A conspiracy.
It is. But you rightly point out the Americans are paying for this, and so are the Europeans, even worse than us. $8 a gas gallon in California. I think it's 10 or so in Europe. But put up this next clip, because this demonstrates exactly this from the article, exactly what's happening. There is, though, no immediate sign of Russia pulling out of Ukraine, and that's hardly surprising, because the sanctions have had the perverse effect of driving up the cost of Russia's oil and gas imports, massively boosting its trade balance and financing its war effort. In the first 4 months of 2022, Putin could boast a current account surplus of $96 billion, more than triple the figure for the same period in 2021. So he's tripled his trade surplus. He is massively exporting gas at super high prices, and ironically actually funding his war because of U.S. sanctions. Again, you could not have a better outcome if you were Putin masterminding a whole slew of spies within Brussels and Washington to do his bidding. Forget about Trump. You know, you'd have all this doing. So it's just amazing. And this, in a nutshell, is what sanctions do. They have the opposite effect.
And the inflation causes the prices to rise, and they don't know what to do about it because they don't understand what's happening. But one thing that does happen is services get mixed up because you've lost the unit of account, and the smoothness of a marketplace and the invisible hand is stomped on. You can't do it. Doesn't work. So I was talking to this businessman. He was in international trade and business like this, and I said, you know, here we're starting to hear now that if you want something, if you're going to buy a car or whatever, they might tag on and say that price is good for a week or 2 weeks or a month or something like that. You can't come back in 6 months and do that. So there are limits. And I brought that subject up to him, and he says, the stuff we're buying now, they have a guarantee on a price of 1 day.
Wow.
You buy it or else the price could go up tomorrow. I said, you know, I've watched this for a long time, and I watched it closely in the 70s. I'm sure there could have been contracts like that, but that to me was really startling. That that's a big deal because you know the speed of exchange of money really increases the money supply, because if you can spend the same dollar 4 times in 1 day, you know you have more access to the volume of money. And it's something that's why at the end, even the Fed can't stop it.
Yeah.
It's the psychology of the money and the pricing structure. But anyway, that was just I was a bit shocked about that. Okay.
Well, I'm just going to close out by saying thanks to our viewers, obviously, as we do every day. Thank our viewers. Also, to those traveling for our Saturday conference, we pray you have safe travels. We look forward to seeing you, to having a good time. I know, as our good friend Bumper Hornberger said, meeting with all of you recharges our batteries. We're working in a cave here trying to put out the show every day. So meeting real live people is a real charge for us as well. So we're looking forward to it as well. So we'll see you all on Saturday.
Very good. I want to just close once again, of course, for thanking our viewers for tuning in. It's very important to us, and it's very important that you adopt the principle that spread the message, because that makes all the difference in the world. And sometimes people get discouraged and say, well, we're still only 10% of the population. I don't even think about that. I think about the quality of people who care about it and understand it, because it's so powerful, the power of an idea. But unfortunately, one thing you have to contest with are bad ideas work the same way. If there's no resistance, and the best resistance to a bad idea is a good idea, because as libertarians, you don't say, well, these people have bad ideas, we have to destroy them, and we have to use violence to stop what they're doing. No, it's in the area of understanding. Right now, I would say there's very few people that come out of our government school system and our government colleges and have any vague notion about the principles of the free market. And I think that if you did a poll and say, you know, what do you think about the free market? Let's say the Austrian School of Economics. I bet their eyes would glaze over. But our job is to spread that message, because I think it's such a perfect answer to the tragedies we have, because just about everything we talk about here, you can and do it without demagoguing it, point back to some ridiculous thing that the government has done in a bad policy, or what the economists taught us to do and practice. And so therefore, we have a lot of options, and that's where I'm more optimistic. I'm not very optimistic about how many people we have in Washington. Sometimes there's very few standing up for these principles, but there's more and more people now, and where we get the receiving message there is every year that we have a conference, we have more and more people that would like to come, and we appreciate that very much. I want to thank everybody for tuning in today to the Liberty Report. Please come back soon.